Hello. Uh, we will be discussing Preludes today, Preludes by T S Eliot. Of course, there is another Preludes by Wordsworth. So this is trying to provide images just like the Wordsworth Preludes, but, in an entirely different direction. So before I proceed with the poem, let me remind one of the primary elements from the other poem, Portrait of the Lady. Uh, Poetry for modernists is always a kind of a conflict, conflict within oneself, right? So what is that conflict? So they try to represent the conflict in their poems. What is that conflict? The conflict is, it's a very a very overt conflict between romance and realism. Romance is romantic idea, that is, fantasy, and realism is what we can see and experience. So, being modernist, of course, the T S Eliot, Yeats, they lean towards realism, modernism, and that is presented here. And when they present, of course, there are it will not be beautiful image or a fantasized image. It will be very realistic image, and kind of an ugly image which is being presented by T.S. Eliot. And to start with, so some of the details in the beginning of the poem, we have to remember Charles Baudelaire, one of the one of the great writers that T.S. Eliot was influenced from, who who started a tradition of describing a city, scenario, cities, skyline, or city atmosphere. And of course, the city atmosphere produced in Charles Baudelaire or T.S. Eliot is not something which is, beautiful image. It's always an ugly image, or rather realistic image. So Preludes, is presented in four short parts, and it is one of the easiest poems of T.S. Eliot. The winter evening settles down with smell of steaks in passageways, 6 o'clock. So he's trying to present, he's trying to present a setup, what kind of situation, the present images, occur. So winter evening. So again, season is mentioned, and it is evening, 6 o'clock. Smell of steaks in the passageways, burn, so trying to present a sensory view of the situation. The burnt out ends of smoky days, such a interesting image which he presents. So it is, one, uh, the air smells of the smoke, right? So that is one. It's a smoky day, uh, but it feels also like a burnt ends of smoke. So it is like, when a cigarette is completely burnt out, whatever the thing that remains, that is how it feels like, that is, you know um, so, it feels like, it is 6 o'clock in the evening, but the day is already burnt out. And so that, that feeling of getting burnt out is, is something which is presented here. Now a gusty shower wraps the grimy scrapes, right? So suddenly it rains, and it is, with the rain, wind, and it is moving around this grimy scrapes, like, dirty scrapes of withered leaves about your feet. So all the withered leaves are, during the rainy days, like, after it rains for a couple of days, what happens is, the leaves start withering, and, it starts disintegrating, and, they are up to your feet. Like, of course, it is not a pleasant feeling, walking in the withered leaves. Um, and the newspaper from vacant lots, and pieces of newspaper lying around. So vacant is not just presenting a visual image here, but also vacant lot is a hint to the feelings of people. Feelings of people is also empty. The showers beat on broken blinds and chimney pots, and at the corner of the street, a lonely cab horse steams and stamps. So showers, the rain is beating the windows and the blinds and the chimney pots. So basically, it is raining, and it is hitting everywhere, and that sound is being heard. So smell, sound, and the sight, and of course, the withered leaves, sticking onto feet, the touch as well. So all the senses, are being bombarded with the ugliness. So the lonely cab horse steams and stamps. It is up with its own business, and steams. That is like when it breathes. So if you have seen in the movies or some videos, like when a horse breathes in a very low temperature, it feels like steam is coming out of his mouth. So that should tell us it is quite cold, 6 o'clock in the evening. So so again, nothing is pleasant around him. The weather is unpleasant, the smell is unpleasant, the touch is unpleasant, and everything around him is unpleasant. And then the lighting of the lamps suddenly, lamps get lightened. So that is an image. So it's a he this entire poem is series of images presented in front of us, and the images should tell us the ugliness of the world that the speaker live in. So it's just a description of one day, evening to again next evening, and whatever the sight, whatever the scenes that he sees, that he's presenting. Of course, the speaker need not be author; it's a speaker. Let's keep it as a speaker. Morning comes to consciousness, a faint stale smell of beer from the sawdust trampled street with all its muddy feet that pressed. And the streets are filled with the stale smell of beer. Again, and an unpleasant odor is filled. And the morning comes to consciousness. Suddenly, morning. The way he presented it, it's morning. He doesn't say it. Morning come to consciousness of faint, stale smell of beer from sawdust trampled street. Streets are filled with sawdust. It is again unclean, with all the muddy feet that pressed to early coffee stands. All the muddy feet are walking. So again, feet are not clean, muddy feet walking, and so standing in front of early coffee stands. So people are, press is rushing, people are rushing to the coffee stands so that they can have coffee and go to the work. So he's presenting the working class, the idea of working class. And yeah, so the working class is mechanical, the working class is there is a sense of the way it is presented. Oh, they have to go through all this. So that is the sense which you feel here, a hint of bitterness towards the working class. With other masquerades that the time resumes. Masquerades, masks, you know, the pretenses, and all that, the false images. So people are rushing towards that. People are rushing towards to be their false self. That the time resumes. That time takes them to. So 6 o'clock, they're fine people. Morning 6 o'clock, they're normal. 9 o'clock, they are this stern people, or whatever the depending on their job, they use those masks. One thinks of all the hands that are raising dingy shades in thousand furnished rooms, right? All the hands, that are that are like removing the shades from the windows, like dirty, dingy, curtains which are there, like so that is again very so they have to go through all that, so, so there's a clear sense of pity about the working class. And again, it comes back to the, I mean, the interesting part is, the speaker is not saying, I tossed a blanket from the bed. It says you tossed a blanket from the bed. So it is in the second person narration, which is very, very rare in poetry and storytelling. So, but still, it's one of the rare moments where we find. But in Preludes, it happens. You tossed a blanket from your bed. That is when you wake up, like you are unsure about getting up. So despite you toss the blanket from your bed, you lay upon your back, like you just just lay upon your back, staring at the ceiling, and waited. You dozed and watched the night revealing the thousand sordid images. So you're just laying upon your back, thinking, looking at the ceiling, and recalling all the thousand sordid images that night produced, of which your soul was constituted. So sordid images, cursed images, ugly images. So basically nightmares, here the way it is presented, it is not nightmares as such, because the person clearly seemed to be an insomniac that clearly doesn't seem to catch sleep. And in his sleeplessness, all the ugly thoughts come to him. They flickered against the ceiling, like he is awake. He's when he's staring at the ceiling, all the sordid images, all the dangerous images appear there. He's an insomniac. He can't catch sleep. And of course, when what is the meaning of not catching sleep? That means he's worried. And of course, he's a modern person. He is haunted by various images. And when all the world come back and light crept up between the shutters, all the world come back, like it is been morning, the streets are bustling, and the lights are creeping in between the shutters, the window shutters, slowly the sun rays are hitting. You heard the sparrows in the gutters. So early morning, the it's a classic image that the birds sing, and makes people wake up. So here also bird sings. The sparrows are chattering, but they are chattering from the gutters. Like again, of course, it has to be gutters. Again, like so ugly image one after the other. You had such a vision of the street as the street hardly understand, sitting alone. So the next part is referred to someone sitting along the bed edge, where you curled the papers from your hair, or clasped the yellow soles of feet in the palms of both soiled hands. So the you he's referring to is another person sitting along the bed's edge, where you curled the papers from your hair. Like, you curl the papers. So that means, it might be a female, but the images presented here is not romantic, so they are in the same bed, but so it's not a romantic image. She is just removing all the papers from her hair, clasp the yellow soles of the feet in the palms of both soiled hands. Both muddy hands, and you just catch hold of that yellow sole. Okay. Yeah. So what is, I mean, all the images which are presented so far are counter to any romantic images you might find, like so they are opposite of you know the exaggerated, fantasized, beautified images, very opposite of it. And that is the whole point, like so you won't find any beautiful image in the times when he was writing. uh, and it depends on your view, it might be applicable even today. But so that is the sense of his writing. His soul stretched tight along across the skies that fade behind city block, or trampled by insistent feet at 4 and 5 and 6 o'clock. Again, first we started with the evening, then we uh, we started with we went to morning, and again evening, 5, 6, 4, 5, 6 o'clock. The soul stretched tight across the skies. It feels like his soul is stretched. But is it a stool which is stretched? But no, well, not actually. It's a figurative writing. That means that his mind is everywhere, right? The fate city block. The kind of the cityscape he's in, or trampled by instinct feet at 4, 5, and 6 o'clock. And it is evening, and it is feeling he's feeling that it is being trampled by the movements which are happening around him. The short square fingers stuffing pipes and evening newspapers, and eyes assured of certainties. So he is describing what he sees around him. So short square fingers. So I mean, so rounded fingers are considered beautiful. Squares are not so much. Stuffing pipes again. So a smell of tobacco. So things are again unpleasant. Evening newspapers. Next day it will be for me, it is interesting that he considers evening newspaper as an ugly image. The kind of voices it produces, like kind of things it says about newspapers, like so worse than garbage, right? So again, next day, they are sticking out to his feet. So eyes assured of certainties. So certain certainties, monotony, so it is a debate whether it should be called as consistency or monotony. Here it is clearly monotony, right? So the same things again and again, what is coming, and so that's uninteresting. So people are like, all they are involved in this boring activities. The conscience of the blackened streets, impatient to assume the world. So, um, so the concise, but there somewhere, there is a concise. There is this heart. There is this rationality to distinguish between good and bad. So that is somewhere alive, but it is impatient to assume the world. Like, it is waiting to be assumed by the world, it is waiting to be accepted by the world. I am moved by the fancies that are curled among these images and cling, right? So so the question is, what drives all this? What drives all this monotonous things? What drives all these ugly, disgusting images? The notion of some infinitely gentle, infinitely suffering thing. So what keep These things alive. What keep people alive is the notion of infinitely gentle, infinitely suffering thing, the divine, right? So, looking at divine for guidance, so that is what keeps people alive. That is what keep all these things alive. And don't think for a moment, you know, he is saying that, that is required, or he is fantasizing about it. Wipe your hands across your mouth and laugh. Yeah, if you're thinking that, thinking about this divinity, hold your hands across your mouth and laugh. The words revolves like ancient women gathering fuel in vacant lots, right? So the world is revolving, like, you know an ancient woman gathering fuel, right? So it's, the world is lost. The world is meaninglessness, the meaninglessness of an action, searching for firewood in an empty lot, not possible. So the meaninglessness of action, meaninglessness of everything around him is, is pricking him. And the vacant lots, also speak about the spiritual vacancy present, right? So there is nothing inside, there is nothing inside that drives people. So this is the image which is presented here. And if you are confused what this is all about, it is very simple. The things, if you try to look beauty around you, there is no beauty. There is only these ugly images and meaningless actions, and nothing. So one of the sense of modernism is loss of meaning. And here we find that loss of meaning, clearly haunting, the speaker. So that is all about preludes. Very easy, very clear to understand. And so of course, it is enjoyable. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you.